I'm not Steve Jolly, I'm David Philp. I'm head of BIM for Mace, and hopefully many of you have heard of Mace. But this afternoon I'm going to be talking about our journey, about asset information modelling, what that looks like, our vision, where we think it's going, and we wanted a bit of a glimmer into the future as well as maybe looking at some practical examples of where we're starting to use our information modelling at this moment in time as well. Oh, not me. No, who's that guy? Yeah, I just won't move down. There we go. It's not going to move down, Steve. There we go. There we go. I'll start again. There we go. There's David Philp, fantastic guy. So we said, you know, who's Mace? Well, Mace were founded back in 1990, and today it's an international consultancy and construction company. As you can see there, we've got 4, if you like, core services: program project management, construction delivery, cost, and a big part that's important to us as well is facilities management, operational life cycle as well. Well, why is that important for us? As Steve mentioned, it's about information modelling and management right through the entire asset life cycle. So the big part for us, right through definition, right through to operation and back again, how do we start to manage all that information and asset data? Well, one of the things that's always worth giving out a bit of context, and at Mace we probably think this is the most exciting time to be part of our built environment. We know it's a challenging world out there, but well, we look at the UK construction industry and it is one of the biggest in the world. Our gross value add, in terms of construction, is 6.7 of the GVA, which turns out into 89.5 billion. So we've got a huge industry out there, one to be proud of. But what we are seeing, and Steve talked about that, we are reshaping it. We are starting to think now in terms of how we move into this digital era and start to use our information. So if anything this afternoon, it's about the effective use of asset data. We often talk about information modelling and management in terms of building and capturing data sets, but a big part of it is we actually use data as well. And one of the big things for us, well, we think in terms of Mace that we've now got to come really best in class at using our information modelling and start to think about sweating those assets as well. The OCED estimate that there's over $40 trillion could be invested in infrastructure and projects worldwide by 2030. So huge prize out there that we've got to try and access, and we want to be able to realise the full potential of that strategic opportunity. Well, how are we going to do it? Big part of us, well, is it starting to think about building information modelling? Well, actually what we say is it's probably not. Building information modelling is a key part of it, but it's not a panacea. We think it's very much, it's not the silver bullet, but it's there as an enabler. And you can see on the right-hand side, the term we use is asset lifecycle integration. For us, it's about using that model and start to think how it can help our business process in terms of integration. Start to think about how as well it can help from a social sciences in terms of, as Steve mentioned, collaboration. Big part of what we're trying to do as well is bring people together, especially from the operational life cycle. In fact, at that point, can I ask a question? How many here, folk in the audience today, are from the operations side? Excellent. We've got 2 people, but again, I think that represents often it's people very much from that delivery life cycle, right at the front end. We want to make sure we get more people there. And it's really about the effective management of information right through that asset life cycle. BIM for us, part of it, but it's about how it can help power our model. So for us, it's very much about building information, a way of working that lets us integrate our business model, that complete asset life cycle from briefing, operation, and right back. And we heard Steve showing us we've got the tools now, digital tool set, we've got to build the integrated processes, the structured data sets that are a big, big part. We often use data but not structured, but the big part, it's all about people, our culture, innovation, and collaborative working. So start to think, how do we use our data in that collaborative environment? And that's a key part for us, bringing people together. And we've created, we call it our Mace BIM Promise, but it's about pursuit of a better way. And I think that's where industry is going at the moment, striving to redefine our built environment, not just in the creation of assets, but the care for them as well. We are living in a war economy. We've got to think, how do we make our assets perform better in real time as well? So we also see our, if you like, our asset modelling being part of an experience for customers as well, giving them surety, giving them transparency and giving them better outcomes, business outcomes, service outcomes at each stage of the project lifecycle. And we've created, if you like, we call it our Mace BIM promise, but actually starting to understand from a client point of view, what outcomes do you want? Creating that integrated culture we mentioned, because of our business model, we can start to create that. We can plug and play parts of the business. We can optimize solutions. We're starting to think about rapid prototyping. We've now got things like the power of the cloud we can use, but also starting to think about how we transact upon data. We're often good at building 3D models, but we don't transact. So starting to think about how we do that. Big part as well, removing waste. How do we start to unlock, build flawlessly on site, and start to think BIM in terms of innovation? What problems the client have, and how can we help use our modelling techniques to try and solve it? But for us, it's very much creating that 360-degree, which we think it is, flow of information. For us, it's about creating, if you like, that capability. So what do we want to do for it? Well, our asset lifecycle model, our strategic aims, is to optimize business outcomes. So what we're saying, we don't want a better model. The 3D models are very, very nice, but we want to use all that information to give our clients better business outcomes. So not just about the asset, but how the asset is going to be used. We obviously want to optimize the asset performance in terms of service charges, operational lifecycle. How do we maximize that? And obviously plan preventative maintenance, try and give an effective strategy. But also in terms of the program delivery, and we've seen through Steve, the tools are there now. We start to think about constraints analysis, start to think about BIM in terms of look ahead, that will reduce waste, reduce risk. But we've got to start thinking as well about that data set. It's not just an individual project, but right across the portfolio. How can we start to create data foresight where we start to learn lessons? We've got to think about innovation as well, but for us, it's about integrating the entire asset life cycle. But what we are seeing, and one of the things we want to play our part is, was that this is an interesting time for industry. And if anything, we want to be part of helping improve the future of our industry collectively. And I think for me, that's been the big part about BIM. It's that open radicalness, people getting together to try and improve, nudge our industry that a little bit forward. So our model, well, for us, asset lifecycle operations, it's outcome-based solutions. It's how we define, how we create, care, and refine our assets. So we're trying to create a business model, as I said, underpinned. And we've got 6 pillars. We think we should be purpose-driven. We should capture and use our assets for a real purpose. We've got to know what our clients want. We've got to mine our data sets now. We need intelligent asset insight, as you would in terms of any other industry. Low-hanging fruit, we want to be able to simulate things. We want to look into the future and try and take that waste out of it. We want to then use that to innovate. How can we come up with the very best solutions, the right solutions for a project, and start to think about optimization? Now here, you'll hear later on one of our speakers talking about build 3, 4, 5 times the model, and then once flawlessly, coordinated perfectly out in sight. And then outcomes realised. Let's actually measure it. Did we give the clients what we wanted? Start thinking about post-occupancy evaluation, start thinking about soft landings, and feeding it back. So you can start to see we're using that information to create a 360-degree viewpoint. So we'll pick a few of them. Understanding the client requirements, being purpose-driven, and then realising those outcomes. And if we think we can do that, we give our clients a very clear signature experience, being able to either bring all the Mace Group companies together with a common data set, integrated process, or we can plug and play different parts. So an example, we're now working with clients in terms of discovering their mission, helping them define a strategic brief, what data they require, but also not thinking purely from a CapEx point, but the TOTEX, the total expenditure and asset, using our data foresight to help them define, creating BIM EIRs, information requirements from a client's point of view. What data do they need? What questions is that? And how can they transact upon it? A big part, you've seen from Steve already, starting to think making simulation part of everything we do, but moving that simulation to innovation and starting to think how we can optimise our built experience as well. Thinking about rapid prototyping, concurrent engineering, working in that live environment, answering questions using the data, and thinking more and more about the collaboration side of it as well. But also at the early stages, thinking about systems integration and commissioning, starting to have that foresight as well. And obviously moving on, the real big thing for us is moving from, if you like, optimization to realizing outcomes. Thinking about the operational life cycle, computer-assisted facilities modeling, but also think more and more in terms of post-occupancy evaluation reviews, linkage to BMS, but start to capture those lessons learned and start to feed back. But what we do think in the world of BIM, we're starting to see a built environment entering a new digital revolution. And I think, to me, this is a real big thing for me. We're starting to see data growth in the built environment. Okay, we're seeing it at the right-hand side, generally this paradigm within industry. But what's that going to mean to our industry? We've got a group called the BIM 2050 group that's looking forward and starting to see, actually, it's going to mean huge difference in our environment. We'll start to see, if you like, the data miners being, if you like, the rock stars of what we're doing. But also, we're starting to see our own data is not enough. We've got to be able to start to access other data as well. And it's about connecting and sharing data with others. So we think the construction industry, the built environment, will not be exempt from that data revolution. Start to use that to act upon that asset data and start to solve those key challenges. I think when we talk about construction, we're rather resistant industry, but we need to move forward. And it's about as much being disruptive, changing our systems, changing our processes. And Steve mentioned government. We're looking at procurement routes as well, but starting to think about new methods and technology. This is very much a global race. BIM, asset information modelling, is front and centre around the world in terms of using our digital technologies to be more efficient, to get better outcomes. In the UK, especially in Mace, we want to make sure we can leverage it and start to export that around the world. So we think times are changing, and we think we are as well. We're seeing, our landscape changes every day, and we need to reshape it for a new future. We mentioned we've got to be more thoughtful about asset outcomes. What do our clients want, and go beyond that. We need to be more efficient in terms of what we do, optimising our processes, starting to look at the right IT solutions as an enabler, and be driven by our data, making smart decisions that we can track upon, and start to use it to have foresight. And we really see it as a catalyst for change. We are certainly changing in terms of collaboration and openness. So we see a new landscape, and we want to be very much part of that. So we mentioned our model. It's about integrated asset lifecycle solutions. We mentioned bottom left, the low-hanging fruit. We need to be more efficient. Clients, government want 15 to 20% savings. You don't get that with tinkering with things. This is about changing paradigms. Increasing client data needs. Obviously, government has mandated level 2 BIM by 2016, but also we're seeing the same pull from the private sector clients as well. Our clients are demanding better outcomes from their assets, better carbon solution, and they want better innovation as well. Big part as well is TOTEX, total expenditure. How do we get the right balance? And how do we start to liberate our big data sets as well? And we're starting to see that in terms of built environment starting to become the new norm. So what is it for us? Well, we want to create that DNA, that backbone of all our asset lifecycle information. But the big part is for us, we want to be able to transact upon it. We want to query it as you would in terms of what you do every day, in terms of going into a supermarket. You can transact upon data. We've got to learn from other sectors, and this is where we're moving to as well. The ability to actually transact, not just upon geometry sets, but the non-graphical data as well. And a big part for that for us is understanding data hierarchy. We want to query our assets in terms of geospatial data. What is it? Where is it? And then right down, if you like, to a granular atomic level where you can query a room, we can query an individual asset, and look at the planned preventative maintenance on it. So we want to have that granularity. And we also want to take that in terms of data conceptualization, not just an individual project, but moving it right the way up in terms of portfolio level, where you can start to query that data set at strategic levels. And one of the things that Steve says, and we completely agree, is about rational data exchanges. All that data won't live in one model or one project. We'll always be living in the environment of bringing models and data together to make smarter decisions. So our vision, well, it's about well-managed data. We want to share the data, but we want to start moving towards real-time evaluation and start thinking about active management within that operational life cycle. So very quickly, a typical project, 240 Blackfriars, probably from a tall buildings, 90-story, but again, key thing for us is an enthusiastic client we've got who's really pushing BIM for us in that one. We've built a proper strategy and execution plan. So who's doing BIM, when, how much? So we're thinking about the transactions. We've got a model manager specialist there helping the supply chain get ready for it. And the models are offered by each of the disciplines going forward and all the specialist contractors. So continuous evaluation of performance. We're learning from that project all the time. Lots of low-hanging fruit. Big part for us, BIM is a communication strategy. We're finding it helps us visualize, look at the logistics in terms of optimization, in terms of what that could look like. Big part as well, coordination, detection, and well, what does that actually mean? Obviously, clients are paying for a coordinated design, but we're actually looking at things like builder work connection with services coming right down because it's very much integrated with the design. Construction sequence and planning, as Steve mentioned, is becoming the norm. Looking ahead, looking at data foresight, looking at constraints analysis. I'm sure you hear from Robert at some point in terms of looking at, if you like, the realization in terms of laser scanning, data capture, big part of what we're doing now, making smart decisions using these complementary data sets as well. I think for me, one of the interesting things about this job is the fact we're going beyond. We're going into the operational life cycle. We are got as-built models. We're tying it together with the O&M manuals and attributed plant equipment. So we are starting to think about how we take it together, and we're working with the client in terms of how we can move that value proposition on. Not a big project for us, and we think this one really is taking the very best of British in terms of level 2 BIM out to Russia. A project for St. Petersburg renovation out in Gutenborg, 15,600 apartments. It's worth 1.2 billion, but this one really is level 2 BIM maturity, and we think it's one of the best examples anywhere in the world. So what have we done? Well, we'll talk about data architecture. The first thing is we're working with a company called Bryden Wood to build a digital chassis design. So essentially a kit of parts, and what we've done, we've called it a coarse grain model. So it's basic geometry, enough data for analysis within there. So the architects for the 12 lots can pull that data out to give the coordinated design analysis. But what's happening in the background through transactions, we want to move that into an SQL server where there's a fine-grained model with all, if you like, all that non-graphical data, the carbon details, the cost details, that the client, as Steve mentioned, doesn't have to see the data, but they can query it through a nice simple skin, a user interface, as you can do with your internet banking. So we think this is one of the best examples. It's using level 2, we're transacting upon it. You can see the red diamond. This is very much what we're doing in the UK with government. It's thinking about investment points, data transactions to answer questions. There might be things like concept design, can I afford it, how much carbon is embedded within it, but we're using the data to answer questions at each of the project stages. We're using the UK in terms of the government's plain language question sets. We've turned that into a Russian question set for them. So clients got purpose, data with needs, and we start to query it to answer those questions for them. We then link the plain language questions up to data sets. You can see either answered through geometry, non-graphical data, analysis measures, and we turn it into, if you like, a structured data set so that the client can query at any point. We're also using PAS 1192 Part 2, which is the UK government's common data environment. And in terms of a PAS, it's been one of the biggest downloads ever. So the UK has been very good in terms of defining data standards, transacting upon it, and be able to feed that back. So our next steps, well, for us, it's about rapid virtual prototyping, starting to evaluate and test before we build in that very rapid iterations. We also we're seeing more and more thought in terms of intelligent buildings, starting to link up in terms of our operation to BMS and constantly feeding it back. So much more about that 360, 24/7 process as well. So to conclude, some of the things that's important, we're always looking at things here and now, but actually we want to be looking ahead. We want to start thinking, what are the future technologies, level 3 BIM, integration, what's that going to mean? What does that mean to education? The people who are put out at universities, some of these jobs don't yet exist. Some of the problems we haven't even came up across yet. So we're always trying to have, if you like, foresight in terms of what that looks like, in terms of BIM and integration, in terms of especially our training. And what we are seeing within our organisation, the first thing before people talk about BIM or anything else, understand the asset life cycle. A basic need, understand business, understand procurement, and then start to think about BIM in terms of 101, and then think, how can you infuse that within what you do? Be a digitally enabled project manager, a digitally enabled project surveyor, but start to infuse it within what we do. Start to create that T-shaped learning. We also think we need to think more and more about capturing social data as well, because what's the impact? You put a school within an area, what does that mean in terms of insurance to crime, in terms of getting better outcomes for our hospitals and our prisons as well? So we want to start looking at the social data sets as well, not just those individual projects. Some of the big things we see coming on the horizon as well, semantic data. What's that going to mean as we move on to level 3? And we're seeing that already. Taking simple pieces, what does it mean if we can tie a bit of geospatial data up to a police database, tie it up to environmental protection? Well, suddenly you can query it in terms of site security, flood defences. So already, with very quick semantic data, we're getting some good outcomes. We're also seeing convergence as well, in terms of film gaming technology and help us navigate our models, infinite computing in terms of optimization, big data, hyperconnections, smart cities and smart grids, again, moving away from individual projects, but portfolio data sets as well, in terms of what that looks like. So being more and more connected in terms of what we do. One of my dear colleagues, Professor Arto Kimiani, were out in Dusseldorf last week, and we're looking at the future. What's industrial 3D contour printing going to do? What does that mean to our industry in terms of social impact? The trades we hold dear, bricklayers, will we need so many of them? What happens to these people in the future? So we've got a huge responsibility in terms of what we're doing, but what we do know, the future is going to be completely different. We're a group called the BIM 2050 group, and it was one of the things we were looking at last night. What does 2050 hold for us? Well, I don't think any of us know, but we're talking about our children, our grandchildren. What legacy do we want to leave for them? And how do we get started at this moment in time? And we said right at the start, we think this incredible journey we're about to go on. You know, we talk about the internet, it's early days like Amazon, it's only 20 years since they've been going, but we're just starting to move that technology into the built environment. And one thing at Mace, we're very passionate about making that change happen. So thank you for listening to our story, and enjoyed speaking.